Good evening again. You're watching the Gravitas special edition as we track the very latest from Germany on election day. Angela Merkel is on the brink of replicating the feat of her mentor, Helmut Kohl. Let's take a look at her journey so far in German politics.
In power for over a decade, German Chancellor Angela Merkel is widely seen as a rock of stability, respected abroad and supported at home. Her popularity even seems to have survived the migrant crisis, which at one stage threatened her leadership as Germany opened its doors to hundreds of thousands of mainly Syrian refugees.
What we're experiencing is something that will continue to occupy us in the years to come. We'll change, and we want that change to be positive, and we think we can do that.
To regain voter support, she subsequently took a firmer line on immigration. 1 month before the election, her CDU party is polling at around 40%, compared to the opposition SPD's 25%. She seems intent on blocking the far right, although was put on the back foot by her citizens' reaction to refugees.
Frau Merkel ist genauso überrascht gewesen, dann letztendlich wie viele der Menschen.
Merkel was surprised to see how much Germans committed to helping refugees, but she was also sadly surprised to see that some people clearly expressed racism and hostility, especially in regions where there were no refugees coming.
Deutlich geworden ist, und zwar gerade in den Regionen, die keine Flüchtlinge aufgenommen haben.
Merkel grew up in the communist East and entered politics after the fall of the Berlin Wall. She saw off Helmut Kohl to become leader of the Christian Democrats in 2000. Renowned for her pragmatism and quiet confidence, she's been voted German Chancellor 3 times, in 2005, 2009 and 2013.
Sie ist politisch.
She's positioned herself in the middle politically, which has allowed her to project a sense of continuity and security among voters.
Merkel's ordinary air continues to make her a hit with voters. She spends holidays hiking in the Alps with her husband and shops in a neighbourhood supermarket. Yet she doesn't shy away from the limelight. Forbes magazine named her the world's most powerful woman for the 11th time in 2016. And if she wins a 4th term in office, that accolade is unlikely to be the last.
And this is her competitor, Martin Schulz. He was in government with the German Chancellor Angela Merkel, but he decided to challenge her this time. Who is this man and what does his party, the SPD, offer to the German citizens who vote for them? Here's a report.
He's been a member of the European Parliament since 1994. But now Martin Schulz is back in his native Germany, hoping to be Chancellor. In his way stands Angela Merkel, running for her 4th term. The centre-left Schulz has taken up the challenge, accusing her of avoiding taking stands on key political issues to silence debate.
In Berlin circles, this is sometimes called asymmetric demobilization. I call it an attack against democracy.
After surging in the polls soon after his selection, support for Schulz's SPD party has fallen back to little more than half that of Merkel's centre-right CDU. While Schulz is well known in Germany for his long career in the European Parliament, his time away from home can be seen as both an asset and a liability.
One can't deny his political ability. He's new to the national political scene, even though he's been a member of the SPD's leadership for 2 decades. But people see him as a new face.
Schulz was born near the Belgian border in West Germany and dropped out of high school hoping to become a professional footballer. After a knee injury ruined his chances, he battled depression and alcoholism but became teetotal and by 1987 was mayor of his town. In the European Parliament, his mastery of 5 languages helped him become its president in 2012.
Never like in current times does the world need a strong, self-confident and united European Union which stands up for its values and beliefs and defends and strengthens what previous generations have built.
In the Parliament, Schulz sparred with far-right politicians, and in 2003 Silvio Berlusconi caused outrage by comparing him to a Nazi concentration camp leader. On the campaign trail, Schulz has pledged to water down key labour reforms to give employees more rights and, he hopes, reduce inequality. Since 2013, his SPD party has been in coalition with Angela Merkel's CDU. Unless his party's polling improves, Scholz might have to choose whether the SPD goes back into coalition with Merkel or becomes Germany's largest opposition party.
Let's dwell on Angela Merkel for a bit. And Daniel, one of the newspaper editorials today described her as a history maker without heroism. Is that a fair description?
I think it is, and I think that's what she stands out for and what makes her popular. Because as many observers, in particular from the United States and England, have observed about Germany, is that Germany as a nation is a reluctant leader. It has become a focal power because of its economic might and because its influence within the European Union, which by comparison to any other economic bloc still is the richest and economically most influential bloc in the world. But Germany, because of its historic experience with trying to attain world power, today is very, very reluctant to follow the path of gaining international influence. And the sort of quiet, sober, managerial way that Angela Merkel goes about with her policies is what people here appreciate very much.
Padma, if you look at leaders around the world, from Macron to Trudeau to Trump to even our own Prime Minister, Angela Merkel is a different leader in that sense. None of that flamboyance, and yet she seems to be taking her country in the right direction.
Yes, she seems to be taking her country in the right direction, but the criticism of Angela Merkel, coming predominantly from the SPD, who has been in a coalition with her, is that many of the ideas that reached fruition and that has brought Germany to where it is today, which is a stable economy again, with the euro stable, the unemployment being down, and also with the export market rising again and booming again, much of these are fruits of the SPD's earlier labour, for which, in fact, the previous Chancellor, Gerhard Schröder, I beg your pardon, lost the elections. So the SPD has reason to feel disgruntled by that, because they do feel that the traditional position of the CDU was more towards the right of centre, and that somehow Angela Merkel has cleverly manipulated her party to occupy the centrist position, which means that the SPD is, is sort of looking for a raison d'être, if you like, and has been saying that it would prefer to sit in the opposition. Now, I am joined here, Palki, by a very senior journalist, Jan Ross, who is the South Asia correspondent, the bureau chief for Germany's largest weekly newspaper, Die Zeit. And we've just got the first exit poll results, where we see about 13.5% for the AfD. What do you make of the results?
It is a bit of a shock. The result for the right-wingers seems to be very good. Stronger than many people have expected, maybe even they themselves have expected. The SPD is down very much, which means that they probably will not be willing to enter into another grand coalition with Angela Merkel, because they realize what it has done to them. So it will be difficult for the Chancellor to build a coalition to govern, although her personal standing is still reasonably good.
Now, is there going to be a lot of horse trading like we have, Jan? And where do you think, I heard rumours earlier that if the major party, the Union of Chancellor Angela Merkel, does not find the right coalition, then there may even be fresh elections?
Well, they will definitely try to avoid this, because it would look like shirking their responsibility, and it would, of course, run the risk of making the extremes even stronger. So they will try to form a coalition, but it will be difficult. You know, in our system we have proportional voting, there's no first past the post, so nobody usually wins an outright majority. But this result may mean that you can't even govern with two parties, that you need three parties to cobble together a coalition, which makes it vastly more difficult.
Would you say that this particular election has been more of a polarized election than those in the past, Jan? And if so, why?
It's a paradox, because on the one hand, when you looked at the major parties' candidates, that is Chancellor Merkel and her challenger from the Social Democrats, Martin Schulz, they were very comfortable with each other. And their parties obviously have been governing together for years. So at the center of the political system, there was not much competition. But it got ugly and very competitive and sometimes even nasty when it came to the margins, like to the extremes, like with these AfD people now. And this is where the polarization has taken place.
Thanks very much for speaking to us, Jan Ross. Enjoy the rest of the evening, and we'll keep our fingers crossed for your party to win. That was Jan Ross, correspondent of Die Zeit, a German weekly from the German Embassy Party to get the elections. Stay with WION, and we're getting you more of it as soon as the exit polls start coming in. This is Padma Rao. Back to the studio.
You said it. The exit polls have started coming in. In fact, Angela Merkel's CDU-CSU getting 32.5% at this point. So leading Anhau, the SPD with 20%, the AfD, the ultra-right, 13.5%, and that's huge. The FPD getting 10.5%, the Greens 9.5%, and the Left Party 9%. So Angela Merkel still maintaining the lead, but there's a good chance that she will have to enter into some sort of a coalition. We'll talk about that in just a bit. But Ambassador Singh, before we come to that, I want you to tell our viewers about the politics of Angela Merkel. Some say that she has appropriated the social equality platform of the left and also neutralized or diluted the anti-immigrant agenda of the right and positioned herself somewhere very comfortably in between, though her party is technically the centre-right.
Indeed, I think that is absolutely right. What Angela Merkel did, particularly in her second term, is took the SPD agenda and implemented many of those things to give her party a very centrist socialist view. So today the government can best be described as a social market economy government. Then she went into certain things, for instance, stepped out of nuclear power and into renewable power. She stepped out of anti-Islam, which was never their thing, but stepped in to pro-immigration, stepped out of unemployment, but started talking more about more employment for women, and she actually opened up more assignments for women in corporate boards. So she has taken all the big agendas, even LGBT rights. I mean, she has said we are now for them. Yeah. So she has moved to not only the SPD's agenda, but the Green agenda. So today, therefore, what you have is a melange in the middle. So everybody is a centrist in Germany. The best centrist is going to win.
Right, and I'm going to request my producer to once again bring up those figures. These are, of course, live visuals that we're getting from Germany, but we have the first exit poll results, which basically put Angela Merkel well ahead of anyone else, 32.5%, and that is how the figure looks. That is the CDU at 32.5%. Her closest competitor, the SPD, with 20%. The AfD, this is the left, of course, with 9%. The FPD getting 10.5%. The Greens, who some said that Angela Merkel could look at tying up with in case of a hung parliament, 9.5%, and the far right getting 13.5%, and that is going to be one of the big headlines from this German election. Let's quickly take a look at how what are the possibilities for a coalition. Angela Merkel, if elected to office again today, which she most likely will be, would achieve the feat that her mentor Helmut Kohl achieved. He was, of course, instrumental in the reunification of Germany. Let's also bring you the numbers in terms of how things stand. In case of a coalition, what are Angela Merkel's choices? What are her options? Daniel, let me put that question to you. What is her best bet?
I think Jan Ross of Die Zeit was correct when he said that the SPD is her former coalition partner is so diminished now that they're unlikely to get into the next government. But still, what you have to remember about Germany's electoral system, because we have this very peculiar system of two votes, one that counts in a relative way, the other in a proportionate way, the other counting in a first-past-the-post system, we can't yet determine really what the next parliament would look like. And of course, majorities are formed in parliament and not according to the ballot box percentages. But what would be one likely outcome outcome is that Angela Merkel would try to form a coalition with both the Liberal Party, which has fared extremely well compared to the recent polls ahead of the elections, which saw the Liberal Party on the same level as the Green Party and the Left Party. But the Liberals have done really much better than had been expected. And the Liberals have always been the natural coalition partners of the CDU. And she could also take the Green Party on board. That would be a coalition that would be pro-modernization, but the Greens and the Liberals don't like each other very much. So it might be a rocky road to travel.
Let's get in Mandy Clark, our London bureau chief, who's also, of course, looking at the first trends coming in, and we'll go to Mandy. Ambassador Singh, what do these numbers look like for India?
Well, as I was saying, I think the fringe is doing better than the centre. So if you ask me who's winning this election, it's certainly the AFD, the Liberals and the Greens, who are doing better than the polls. And it is evident now that SPD, Left and Green is not an option to form a government.
SPD has refused, by the way, and that is another bit of breaking news that we're getting.
There we are. Now, what happens is that if you take the fact that AFD is not going to be a part of any government, you can discount their 13.5.
Can you safely assume that?
I believe so. With these numbers, you can do without them. So I think the CDU and the FDP by themselves can form a minority government and run it so long as AFD is neither here nor there. From time to time, they may need the Greens or they may need the SPD. Our editor friend did mention that the Liberals and the Greens don't get together. Let's not forget that the CSU and the Greens don't get together either. And that is a factor we need to keep in mind.
So while Angela Merkel may be winning a record fourth term, would you say that she will be a weaker chancellor in office?
Well, I think the CDU is weakening. But if Mrs. Merkel is going to be the chancellor, I would say she's going to be a stronger chancellor, because people are actually voting for her rather than the party, because they are voting for fringe parties more than they are voting for the centrist parties. But Mrs. Merkel, as I said, remains the steady hand on the ship, and they would want her to lead.
Okay, I'm going to request you to stay with me. I will take a break, and before we go into a break, I want to tell our viewers these are the two bits of breaking news. These are the two big headlines that we're getting you right now. The CDU well ahead, that's Angela Merkel's party, with 32.5% of votes according to the first exit polls, and Germany's SPD refusing to form a coalition, to enter into a coalition with Angela Merkel after the drubbing, according to some, that they've received 20% of the vote share is what they have, and it'll be a hard sell for them to tie up with Ms. Merkel again.